If you need more precise control over animation, you can go to the graph editor, which will show you the animation curves of your objects. So let's take a look at this scene here. I have this rocket ship, and it's just animating left to right. We have a total of 3 sets of keyframes. Now we can go into the graph editor by going into Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. Now what this does is it shows you all of the animation curves for that object. Now if they're not showing up for you, go ahead and hit the letter F, which is the hotkey for Frame All. Now the graph editor allows you to view all of the animation curves for your object that's selected. So if I deselect it, those curves go away. If I select it, we can see those curves. And then we can step through and show one or more animation curves. So, for example, I'm not scaling this, so all of these curves are flat, but things such as translate do have animation curves. So let's take a look at one of these. I'm going to select the Translate Y animation curve. And if we scroll through, you'll see that this object moves up in this middle keyframe at frame 25 and then back down. So this curve is really telling me the actual height of this. And in fact, if you notice this, you can see that it's actually giving you a scale from 0 to 15. So at the height, this is at 15.4 in the Y direction. So this is actually giving us the actual number that we're using for height. Now, if we want to, we can start to manipulate the curve. So we can select this little tick here, and that's a keyframe. So if we select the curve, that selects everything. Or if we select just that tick, we can move just that. So if I were to, say, move this up and down by left-clicking and dragging, you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm literally reducing that value in the channel box. So my Y value is actually going down or up. I can also change where this key is in time. So if I move it left or right, I can time it so that it hits this value earlier or later in the scene. And when I let go of this, notice how it creates a second little key tick here at frame 13. Now if I select all of the keys for this, you'll see that we have the original keys are here at frame 25, but I moved just this one for Translate Y back to 13. And this is one thing you can't do on the timeline, and that's move and manipulate individual keys. Now I'm going to go ahead and select just Translate Y, and let's go ahead and hit F to frame all. And then let's go ahead and drag this back to frame 25. Now, another way to manipulate curves is to manipulate the actual shape of the curve. If you notice, this keyframe has 2 Bezier handles on either side. And this is one way to actually control how this curve works. So if I select one of these and left-click and drag, you can see that I can affect the curve and affect how this moves through time. So now it goes up high and then comes down. Or I can do the opposite, make it go up way high, down, and then back up. I'm going to go ahead and flatten this out. Now, one thing you can also do with curves is you can use a number of different presets. So if you go into the graph editor here, you'll see that we have all these little buttons along the top, and these are presets for different types of tangents. So let's go ahead and select Translate Y. And let's do a quick little edit here. I'm going to go back down to the timeline, and I'm going to right-click and do a copy. And then I'm going to move forward to, say, frame 32 and do a paste. Now, when I paste this, I'm pasting the exact same values from 25 to 32. And so, logically, this should stop the rocket for that period of time. But if you look at it, it's actually not. So in here, you can see how this is moving backwards a little bit, then forwards. And this is because of the tangents. If we look at the tangent for Translate X, we're getting a slight curve here. And this is because by default, Maya is putting in auto tangents. Now, autotangents are really just a best fit type of curve, and so it's not really calculated to leave things flat. It will always kind of input a little bit of a curve. But we can change that by changing this type of tangent. So if I select both of these, we can go through and change these tangents to flatten them out. Now, one way to do this is to simply select that tangent and dial it in manually, but you'll never be sure if you're actually getting it exactly flat. Now, another way to do this is to use some of these presets. So if we select spline tangents, well, that doesn't work, but again, you can see how this creates this type of tangent. Now, if we select clamped tangents, this will flatten it out. And what clamped tangents does is that if the first and second keyframe are the same, it will go ahead and just draw a straight line between them. So now, in X at least, this is actually still. Now, we have a number of other tangents as well. One of the most important ones is linear. So if I select all of these and hit linear tangents, you'll see that it draws straight lines between these. And this is great for places where you need constant velocity. We also have flat tangents, which is very similar to clamp tangents in that it will flatten out if the keyframes are the same. Another interesting one is step tangents. Now, what this does is it basically steps between values. So it gives you one value and then it jumps to the next value and then it jumps to the next value. So basically, it's an on or off type of thing, and it's great for things such as lights that turn on or off. But typically for this, I'm going to go ahead and go back to a clamped tangent, and there we go. So as you can see, there's a lot of different ways to manipulate and fine-tune your animation using the graph editor.